tell me a particular story of a player who that really might have made a difference for?
There are so many, so many stories. One story that I don't know if this answers your question, but it pops into my mind because it's one of my all-time favorite player stories. I was at the combine with Gerald McCoy, and Gerald was the number 3 overall pick to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2010. He was a classic 3 technique tackle, amazing young man who had lost his mother very suddenly when he was a freshman in college. And he and his mom were very, very close, and she was the strong matriarch of the family. And she died of an aneurysm. It was very sudden. He didn't get to say goodbye, and it always stayed with him. And I had met her actually because I met Gerald when he was in high school. Um, so fast forward, I'm representing him in the draft. We go to the combine, and I'm walking around Indianapolis and going from meeting to meeting, and I get this phone call from Gerald, but I could barely understand him. He was bawling, just could not get his breath. He was bawling. I was like, "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Are you injured? What's going on?" And he's like, "They're trying to get me to do an MRI." And I was like, "Well, then do an MRI." Like, no one's ever died in an MRI machine, to my knowledge. You're going to be fine. Just do the MRI. And he's like, "No, Kels, you don't understand. Like, I'm really claustrophobic, and they don't seem to get that here, and no one will help me." And without even a second thought, I was like, "Do you want me to come to you?" And he's like, "Can you?" I was like, "I will find a way." And so I went to where they had taken him to the MRI machines at the combine at Lucas Oil were too small for him. And so, because he was a massive guy. And so they took him to a local hospital. So this was years ago. So I took a cab to the hospital. I met him. He's pacing around the room. He's in tears. I'm like, "We've got to get this done. Like, if you refuse this MRI, it could hurt your draft stock. Like, they will send you home for the combine. You cannot, they will think you're hiding something. You got to do it. And I will talk you through it." And so we tried everything. We wheeled him in like 7 times. And every single time he would freak out and burst into tears and start yelling. And so finally, I was like, I asked the doctor, I was like, "Can we give him a sedative? Is there like, can we play music? What can we do?" And he's like, "We can't give him anything. You're just going to have to sing to him." And I'm like, "Okay." So we couldn't get it done. He had dinner that night with the Lions. And so I was like, "Look, we got to get him back to dinner." And I put him in a cab, and on the way to dinner, he falls asleep, and I wake him up. I'm like, "Okay, you go to dinner with the Lions. I will take care of this. I'll figure something out." So he went to dinner. I started calling. I found a hospital with an open MRI. So the sides were open. They'd been trying to put him in the normal MRI, wasn't working. So long story short, I sat in an open MRI machine room with my player because he refused to let me leave the room. And I sat with him for 4 hours while he got his MRI, and until like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I told jokes, I sang to him, I visualized with him, like, this is what it's going to be like when you're drafted. And then when you run out of the tunnel the first time in an NFL uniform. And I was just trying to get his mind off of what he was going through. And tears were still streaming down his face. Anyway, bottom line, he gets out, and I hear him on the phone with his dad. And he's like, "Dad, it was like Mom was in the room with me." And the tech was like, "I have never seen an agent do that. I've never seen an agent that cared enough to go spend time to make sure her player was going to be okay." And that moment solidified our relationship. He always knew I had his back.
It's so funny, Kelly. I had a player after one of our games, and they'll take them for, to get examined, right?
Yeah.
Right after the game, they get hurt, and they just send him off. And I was like, "Wait a minute, hold on, who's with him right now?"
He's by himself, hurt.
Right. And they're like, "Oh, the med staff." And I was like, no. Mm-mm. And I was like right in there with them holding his hand. You might not be able to do anything, but you certainly can, you know, take away some of that, um,
Yeah.
that pain.
They're human beings. They
Yeah.
are, they may be big and talented and ridiculously strong, but they are human beings. And that's when people say, "Oh, women aren't wired to be agents. Women are too soft or too emotional or whatever." I'm like, "No, women are the badasses that can do it all. Like, we can be there and be caring and make them feel like we know who they are as people and value them as people. And we can also fight our asses off for them to make sure that they have the best possible opportunities. So women are fully capable.